Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight, we are delighted to bring you this program on rescuing Blanding's turtle. Nate Hamble is a wildlife interpreter for Willowbrook Wildlife Center, part of the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. So please join me in welcoming Nate.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for having me out here to talk about our Blanding's turtle. As Barry had mentioned, my name is Nate Hamble. I'm a wildlife interpreter at Willowbrook Wildlife Center. I've been with DuPage County Forest Preserve for over 10 years now, and my background is in outdoor education and biology. And so Willowbrook Wildlife Center and the Forest Preserve fit that really well, at least for my interests and for what I'm passionate about. And Blanding's turtles are definitely up there. They're an important species for us. And so that's what our goal here today. I'm not expecting everybody to know everything and remember everything about the Blanding's turtles, but hopefully you can at least have that little heart finger around the next Blanding's turtle, a turtle that you see there. So again, thank you for having me out here. And just out of curiosity, most of the time, I should say this, the presentations are generally either entirely virtual or entirely in person. So those folks that are virtual, I am going to talk to you as if you are here in the room, and feel free if I say anything that is a participation question, throw up a thumbs up or thumbs down. And same for you folks that are here. If I ask you anything, feel free to raise your hand as when I do surveys. And the first question that I have for you is, how many of you have ever heard of a Blanding's turtle prior to this program? All right, those numbers are going up a little bit more. And how many of you have ever seen a Blanding's turtle? What about in the wild? All right, they are endangered. They are endangered in Illinois. So for us to see them, it is quite a treat. And they are difficult to find. These are not the turtles that you're going to find hanging out on the logs in your ponds. Most likely what you're going to find there are going to be painted turtles, possibly common snapping turtles. And realistically, a lot of them are probably going to be red-eared sliders. Those are the ones that we see quite often a lot of when we are walking around, when we see retention ponds and those. Red-eared sliders are not technically native to this area. Painted turtles, common snapping turtles, they definitely are. And so are Blanding's turtles. But because they're endangered, we don't get quite as often of a chance to see them. We're going to learn a little bit about why that might be. And so let's go ahead and learn a little bit about the Blanding's turtle and how to identify. Now, usually I walk around a little bit, so I'm going to try and stay posted up on my boundaries right around here. So, but forgive me those online if I accidentally walk out of the frame. But a Blanding's turtle can be identified. The big identifier here is going to be that yellow throat and chin. The other identifier is going to be this dome-shaped turtle shell. Some turtle shells are a little bit flatter and not quite as dome-shaped. This kind of looks like an army helmet if it's walking across the yard. The yellow spots on there, along with its size, are what's going to indicate that this is a Blanding's turtle. But the real big indicator is this yellow throat and yellow chin. And when they look directly at you, they kind of look like they're smiling. Of course, they don't have lips like we do. They have beaks that are keratin, but it still is. It's nice to know that that turtle looks like he's smiling when he's looking at me. So that is a Blanding's turtle. Before we go into the Blanding's turtle and the specifics of the Blanding's turtle, a little bit about why does this matter? Why is this so important? So how many of you have ever heard of E.O. Wilson, Dr. E.O. Wilson? Fortunately, he passed away not too long ago, but he had this quote, and I absolutely love this quote. And I give this quote out to college groups that we work with, high school groups, because I think it's important for us to just kind of think about every once in a while and take it however you would like. But what this quote is saying is, if all mankind were to disappear, the world would regenerate back to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse into chaos. So what he's meaning by this is that ultimately we rely on all of these animals, on all of this wildlife, whether it's flora or fauna. But if we aren't on this planet, a lot of, maybe not all, but a lot of these flora and fauna are going to be doing just fine without us. So we need to take that and appreciate the value of that, how important it is that we rely on these animals and like I said, in the flora as well, to be able to survive on this planet. There are 6 main ways, unfortunately, that animals can become threatened, endangered, or even extinct on this planet. These are the main ways that they do it. It's called CHIPO. That's how the acronym that we reminded of. We used to say HIPPO, but we added the C in there relatively recently. And that's because climate change is a factor. It does change quite a bit of food supplies and resources that are available to certain species. It may not be as big of an impact right off the bat. You may not see it as quickly, but if you do observations and surveys years and years, you can start to see trends. And trends are really important when doing studies. Habitat loss is a big one. There's just less space. Animals need 4 things to survive. Most of us know what these are: food, water, shelter. And the 4th one is space. Imagine if I were to ask you and said that whole half of the room, you can't sit there. And then I told you, actually, those back rows, you can't sit there. And then we only have these 2 rows available, and I have all of you to sit there. We're going to start crowding each other. I'm sure maybe some of you might be friendly. Others, you may need a little more elbow room. So habitat loss, just having the space there. Invasive species is another issue. What they can do is they can overtake a native species. They can create what we call monocultures, where we lose some biodiversity because one species can be really successful, but there's no checks and balances. Pollution, what we're referring to with that is highly toxic waters, air pollution. How many of you have heard of DDT? Back when that was a big issue? Okay, that's the type of pollution that we're talking about. Almost completely took out our bald eagle and our peregrine falcons, the most flagship species, that we talk about around this area. People and human pressures just in general. So what I'm talking about with this is cats and dogs attacking wildlife, birds flying into windows. This just our general existence. Sometimes we don't recognize how it's impacting the wildlife, but it can be a big impact. Cats can kill billions of birds every year, and then the second hundreds of millions of birds are killed by building collisions every year. And then the last one is overharvesting. And I'm not referring to your recreational hunters and fisher people. I'm referring to commercial harvesting. So we're talking about going into the oceans and commercially harvesting fish. Anyone hear of the passenger pigeon? The passenger pigeon has been wiped off of this planet, unfortunately, because of overharvesting for food consumption. That could be its own presentation, which would be an interesting one to have, but not quite as enlightening, hopefully, or as feel good as the Blanding's turtle might be. But those are the 6 main reasons why we have the potential for threatened, endangered, or the worst, extinct species. Not exclusive, but those are the main ones. Here's a graph, a general idea of human population throughout the years. So we kind of started at just 0, right? And we moved on down 1,000 years, not a whole lot of growth, get to 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, mid 1800s. What happened in the mid 1800s? Can anyone tell me? The Industrial Revolution to surmise, but yes, definitely. And so our populations increased exponentially. And so that was a big thing. And so thinking back to CHIPO, you can recognize how that could be impacted. Of course, climate change, habitat loss, bringing over invasive species and that type of stuff. And so our population significantly increased, and it has had a factor on the rest of the wildlife that we share the planet with. This is through the International Union of Conservation Network, IUCN. This is their red list. This is a trend of graphs that basically all of these graphs that you can see, none of them are going up. They're all slightly declining and some significantly declining of some general major groupings of animals. So corals, birds, mammals, and amphibians. Unfortunately, there's been notice of the numbers of these species and the numbers of individual animals has started to go down. So what is the role of the Blanding's turtle, and how does the Blanding's turtle fit in with all of this? Well, we like to look at it as a couple of different ways. For one, the Blanding's turtle is a native species. And so when you hear the word native species, what I'm referring to is quite literally this definition, that it thrives in this particular ecosystem and provides equilibrium to this ecosystem. It's from here, it's been around here, it has adapted to this environment, and it's learned to survive, not just by itself, but amongst the community. we ask ourselves, is the Blanding's turtle an indicator species? And so an indicator species can provide us with early warning signs of damage. And so the Blanding's turtle can do that for us. It can give us an idea. If the Blanding's turtle can't survive in this wetland, in this ecosystem, what other animals may be impacted by this? And it could be an indicator that other turtle species might be affected by this. Is a Blanding's turtle a keystone species? And that one you can debate a little bit. There are the keystone species that people are very familiar with, like the beaver or the large carnivores like wolves. Those are animals that are going to have an impact not just on their species themselves, but on the ecosystem that surrounds them. And so this definition is it largely affects the abundance of other species. And so if you're familiar with what happened in Yellowstone when they reintroduced the wolves, it significantly changed the environment back to where it was when wolves were present prior to when they were removed from that. Blanding's turtles, some argue that they could be considered somewhat of a keystone species because they're such a mobile species, they move relatively long distances for turtles, that they would be taking aquatic plant matter and moving it from place to place, which could help with some seed dispersal. That could be beneficial. But the one that we're here to talk more about is considering this an umbrella species, which are species selected for making conservation-related decisions. So the DuPage County Forest Preserve decided that the Blanding's turtle is an animal that is important for us so that we can determine whether or not we have the appropriate environment, ecosystems, not only to sustain a Blanding's turtle, but the other animals that would share these particular ecosystems. In the case of Blanding's turtles, they like a very specific type of ecosystem known as sedge marshland. And so saving and protecting our wetlands and our marshlands can have a pretty profound impact on Blanding's turtles and other aquatic wildlife. So those are just a couple of terms I just wanted to throw out there. In case I say them again, we know what I'm referring to. But what we have found out is that the Blanding's turtle has been impacted by a few particular setbacks. And these are here's one of the main ones that if you were to talk to myself and our ecologists, habitat loss is huge, especially in the Chicagoland area. Chicago and the suburbs, we just don't have as much habitat as places like northern Wisconsin or places like out west in Wyoming. We just don't have as much space. There's a lot that's been developed. And so there's habitat loss is an umbrella term, but there's three main problems that can occur that can create habitat loss. We have the destruction of the habitat, which is literally, it's just completely gone. So what once was a tree is now a parking lot kind of thing. We have the degradation of the habitat. So what was biodiverse and filled with flourishing plants and animals, now it's filled with buckthorn and honeysuckle and multiflora rose and burdock and starlings and house sparrows and animals that are non-native to this area, and so they may not be able to promote biodiversity as much as our native species might be able to do. And then the fragmentation of habitat is another problem. What that creates is edge habitat. Edge habitat is great for some species, but not great for all and not great for most species. And so what we mean by fragmentation is that instead of having one big piece of land, big piece of property, where that we have deep inner woods or deep inner prairies or deep wetlands, what we have is we have small ones. We have small wetlands and small forests and small prairies, because prairies are supposed to be massive, right? And so these are smaller habitats, and so it's fragmented. Animals still need to utilize these resources, but they have a few hurdles that they have to go through in order to make that happen. This is a map of DuPage County with the DuPage County Forest Preserves. We have a lot of really awesome green space around here. Unfortunately, it's not as connected as it could be as beneficial for the animals that are living in some of these green spaces. And that's a hard task to do right now with as much development as we have. But I just want to kind of give you an idea or show you what fragmentation kind of looks like. We have some pretty big preserves in here. And these are all the different forest preserves that we have. Now, there are other green spaces besides the forest preserves, but we do have a pretty big impact on the green space in DuPage County. And these are great areas. But even within this, you can see that the boundaries, there's roads, there is railroad systems, there's housing development. It would be awesome If we could get all of this to be one big green space, right? It'd be awesome if we could get all this to be one green space. It'd be awesome for the animals. How realistic would it be economically? That's a whole different question. But this is kind of gives you an idea of the problems with fragmentation. Certain species need to have huge areas. This is the distribution of the Blanding's turtle. They are generally a Great Lakes species. There is a small little section of them on the East Coast. Potentially in the past, this might have been connected all the way to the southern shores of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. But instead, what do we have here? We have New York City, we have Boston, and then we have this mountain range, the Appalachian Mountains, that is running north and south over here. These are big hurdles for Blanding's turtles to try and reestablish a population in here, especially if they were to try to do it without any human intervention. And so we're lucky that we have this type of territory, but again, within this territory, it still can be pretty fragmented. And to give you a visualization of this, this is an aerial photo from 1954, random place in DuPage County. I don't know specifically where it's at, but what we have here is we have farmland. This dark area around here, this is wetland or water, and you can kind of see how the edging on this, I like to kind of call it like a soft edge to it, right? It's not super defined. If we had heavy rains, it would flood a little bit more. If it was a drought, you would still see remnants of it, but it would be, less open water. And then we have our farmlands and a few roads that are here. Now, this is the same area, but this is in 2003. And so I decided we haven't updated it since 20 years from now, because what am I going to update really? Maybe a building looks a little different, maybe a road looks a little bit different, but unfortunately, the area is still heavily developed with subdivisions and road systems. And so those areas that were marshland were the areas that were collecting the rainwater, they're still there. They're collecting the rainwater, but they're not doing it in the same way. They don't have those soft edges. They have real defined edges, and they have major hazards that can occur for these animals. So Blanding's turtles, what makes them unique is, like I had mentioned earlier, they are a mobile species. So when they breed and they nest and they forage, they move quite a bit. They can move up to a couple of miles from their foraging place to their breeding spot or even to their nesting area. And so it wouldn't be out of the question to have a Blanding's turtle want to forage in this area and then go ahead and try and nest in this area, in this wetland area. But look at all these hazards that this animal has to get through in order to make that happen. And so that's what part of the problem is. The other problem is the type of habitat that is here now. It's no longer a wetland. It's not filled with aquatic vegetation that is going along the shorelines. This is filled with most likely mowed grasses in neighborhoods. And so they don't have the habitat that they want to nest in. This is a little bit more of a close-up of fragmentation within green space. This is one of our forest preserves, and these are all the boundary lines within one of our forest preserves. All these green ones are boundary lines. It could be that there is a road, it could be that there is a railroad, a bike path, or a neighborhood. But even within all of this, one of our preserves, we still have a little bit of fragmentation. It's not as bad of a problem for the turtle to go from here to here. There's only one road to go across, but there's still a road for that turtle to have to go across. It still could be deadly for these turtles. This is what a sedge marshland can look like. Granted, there's a lot of cattail in there. That's okay. Animals are learning to do well with the cattail for the time being. But you can see that there is water, open water, covered with a lot of sedges, and even a little bit of a tree line in the background as well. This is great habitat. Blanding's turtles would love to live in this area. How does this habitat get created? Again, we have the space for it. There's also one of those other keystone species that I said it a little bit earlier, and that's the beaver. Beavers make their beaver dams. They are able to hold on to that flood water, and they can create this habitat. But when people are concerned and saying that their basements are flooding, the roads are flooded, and they can't get through, then people look to, okay, why is this flooding? Is there a backup? And so that people turn sometimes and will blame the beavers. And so then the beaver dams are having to be removed. When the beaver dam gets removed, the habitat can start to look more like this. And so now what we have is we have lower water levels and we have more muddy land areas. What's the issue with having that? Can a turtle not just walk across the land? Of course the turtle can walk across the land, but what else can walk across the land? Predators, exactly. So predation can increase. They lose a little bit of that safety that they can feel with that water. And that's the next problem that Blanding's turtles are facing right now. So habitat loss is a big one. The next one is predation. What we have here is what we call mesopredators. Mesopredators are middle of the line predators. These are predators that if we had those big expanses of land where we could sustain wolf populations and mountain lion populations and even bobcat populations, we would have less mesopredators. And just like anything else, some species may not do as well with the development, but other species are doing great with the development around here. I mean, we see tree squirrels, fox or gray squirrels all over the place. They don't seem to have a problem with our suburbs. Opossums, skunks, raccoons, they love our suburbs. They're probably like, yeah, keep going, keep building. I get food from you. I get shelter in your porch and in your attic. I'm good to go. But if you're a Blanding's turtle, you're not a huge fan of that because those are the predators that are eating you or you potentially and your young. And so we have raccoons. They are huge predators on young turtles and on their eggs. Opossums, they do have an impact on them, but probably not nearly as much as raccoons. Maybe the minks as well because they're more of an aquatic mammal, and skunks a little bit too. Ultimately, what we're saying is that these populations of these animals should technically be put in check at some point by predators, larger predators, but that's not happening. And so their populations are increasing because they have the food, water, shelter, and space to do so. This is an example of a turtle that we had in our Head Start program. And what this is a tracker that's on the back of the shell. It's epoxy to the back of the shell, and it has an antenna that goes off to the end. The antenna is supposed to be straight. Antenna is not straight in this one because it's been attacked. This is probably the attack of a raccoon. It's hard to see on this photo, but there are some chew marks on the plastron of this Blanding's turtle. And then of course you can kind of see here, I think if I hit the button, there we go. You can see that the antenna has been impacted by them. So someone was trying to gnaw on this little guy. Luckily he was able to get, or I'm sorry, this would be a she because we put the antennas on the females as opposed to the males. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, so she was able to get away. This is not a full grown. This is a juvenile. So probably close to, judging by the size, maybe 4 or 5 years of age. So still vulnerable to predation. I want to just put those circles up right away because it's tough to see. The other issue isn't just the direct impact of them eating the turtle themselves, but it's about eating their babies. So nest predation is another problem that we find with Blanding's turtles and those mesopredators. They will literally lay their eggs, cover their nest, but there's an odor for those animals that have a great sense of smell. They can hunt it out. They dig it up and they'll decimate that entire nest. So all of the eggs that were laid there are completely decimated. This is a problem for Blanding's turtles for a couple of reasons compared to other turtles. And the big one is that they don't breed as frequently. So some turtles will breed more than once in a year. Blanding's will do it once a year. And the number of eggs in their clutch is smaller than some. Some species can get up to 30 to 40. Blanding's turtles generally are going to have between 13 and 17 eggs. So when one of those nests is decimated, it becomes a big problem. The other issue that Blanding's turtles are running into, or we're running into, I suppose is one way to look at it, is road mortalities. So obviously this is a staged photo, unless we have a really adventurous cameraman and turtle hanging out together. But the idea is this is something that you can see, and we have seen this. Working at Willowbrook Wildlife Center, if you're unfamiliar, is a wildlife hospital. We take care of the native terrestrial vertebrates, basically, so birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. And so we get a lot of turtles, not just Blanding's turtles, we get that are coming in because they've been hit by vehicles. Sometimes it can just be bone damage so the carapace of a Blanding's turtle or of turtles is basically fused ribs and fused backbones. So it's not like a hermit crab where they can leave their turtles, right? This is a part of their body. If that gets damaged, there's potential for it to damage internal organs. What we find is a lot of times they can come in and they might be hit and we can repair it. It's almost like you put on plaster and a cast and we kind of allow the bone to grow back together and we can repair that. But other times you can get spinal damage because of that, because again, that's their backbone. This is their backbone. And then the ribs are all, it's covered by scales, but they're all in there. And so if they get spinal damage, then it can be a problem that's a lot more difficult for them to be able to recover from. But that is a big problem because of all the roads that we have around here, and because of the natural history of Blanding's turtles being such a mobile species, moving from breeding territory to foraging to nesting habitat. They want to move around a lot. This is another human pressure issue that we run into, is fishing lines, fishing lures, fishing equipment, or litter in general. This is actually a fishing hook that was swallowed by the Blanding's turtle. This is the X-ray of the Blanding's turtle. And the nice thing is our veterinarian is an amazing veterinarian, is able to actually, in some cases, you can almost cut a little window in there, like a doorway, open it up, and then be able to remove that foreign object. But that's pretty intense surgery, and you have to anesthetize animals to do things like this. And so it's better to just try your best to either cast better into the water, or just clean up after yourselves when you're done out there fishing. But that's another issue that we find that happens. And again, not just with Blanding's turtles, this happens with multiple species of native turtles here. And here's where the problem comes into play, is the age in which they become sexually mature. So when the turtles are born, obviously you have 100% survival rate, right? That makes sense. They all hatch, they survive. But then it just drops until it starts to flatten out to around 5 years old. I mean, it still is dropping, but it definitely significantly slows down after they get to 5 years of age. Less predators are able to break through the shells. Less predators are able to eat them whole. So and they're also a little bit more weathered and learned how to find their own foods and being able to survive, making a little better decisions. But they're not sexually mature until 15 years of age. So they have to live a long time in the world of reptiles in order for them to be able to reproduce. Or I should say the world of animals. So once they can get to this age, then we can start getting more Blanding's turtles, providing that they're not getting nest predation, right? But before 5 years of age, they're still very vulnerable. And then they have another 10 more years in order to get through. And even though between 5 and 15, their shells are big enough to be able to protect them from raccoons and great blue herons and those types of animals, they're not big enough to be able to protect them from the weight of a car. And that's the reality of it. So when we talk about species, we kind of categorize them. Scientists like to always have things in categories. They like to be nice and organized. And so they have what we call the R-selected species, and we have K-selected species. And I'm going to generalize stuff that is far more complicated, but just to give us an idea of what we're talking about here, and kind of give you some ideas to think about where Blanding's turtles land within these two. So basically, our selected species are going to be the ones that have a high growth rate, less crowded ecological niches. They produce more offspring. That's why I got the little rabbit over here. These are animals that are like, let's get a bunch of them out there, let them run free, and best of luck to you, kind of, right? So that's kind of what goes on with some of that situation. Whereas elephants and humans, we're gonna have a couple, maybe, 1, 2, 3. We're gonna take a lot of time and we're gonna spend a lot of energy trying to raise this animal so that it can get to sexual maturity and then produce its own offspring. And so the efforts are a little bit different. So you have the ones that are just kind of shotgun method and wish you the best of luck, and then you have the types of species that are gonna spend more time with you. So let's talk about where does the Blanding's turtle go. So an Argo organism is usually short-lived. K organisms are long-lived. So Blanding's turtles are long-lived is what we could consider them. You're talking probably 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s is what we're looking for Blanding's turtles. There's thoughts that hopefully our forest preserve, we haven't caught any yet, but we're hoping that we have some centennial turtles in there as well. It's definitely possible within the Blanding's turtles natural history. Are they small or large? Well, the Blanding's turtles overall, you probably would consider them to be kind of a smaller species. High predation vulnerability versus low predation vulnerability. High predation when they're really young, but once they get to a certain age, then it gets a little bit lower. Large number of offspring or a low number of offspring. And this is Compared to turtles, they have a low number of offspring. Do they reproduce at an early age or a late age? At a late age, comparatively. Is there fast maturation or slow maturation? And again, they're slow. But here's where the difference is. Much care for offspring or little care for offspring? Raise your hand if you think Blanding's turtles are wonderful parents and they want to nurture their children until they grow strong and have their own babies and walk them through the parks. No, they don't care. Mama digs a hole, lays an egg, covers up that hole, probably looks around, says, I'm out of here. I got things to do. All right. And then the babies are born in under the dirt, buried alive, right? And then they're like, all right, I got this. I figure this out. I'm going to dig my way on out of here. Which way is the water? Okay, and now we're good. And that's what they're going to do. So from tiny little hatchlings, which you'll see some images of, they are independent and they are on their own. So I want to talk a little bit about the Head Start program, and then we'll start to see some of these species. This is why we, as a forest preserve, decided that it's important for us to kind of step in and start to get a better understanding of what's going on with the Blanding's turtles. So back in the 90s, there was reptile surveys. They realized, all right, something's up with the Blanding's turtle. Let's do a survey specifically for the Blanding's turtle. And then they recognized, okay, this is a problem. The populations are low. They became threatened in Illinois, then they became endangered in Illinois. And so we started to monitor them a little bit more. And what we have here is what we call a pit tag. Anyone here heard of a pit tag before? So basically it's the size of a Tic Tac, and it's kind of like a chip that you would, microchip that you would put in your dog or your cat, more or less. There's a little sinus underneath their front leg that you can, it's inserted in there. It's not really messing with anything, it's just kind of sitting in there. Like I said, it's the size of a Tic Tac. What this does for us is it acts more like a barcode. So what we can do is if we were to trap or if we were to track a Blanding's turtle with our radial telemetry, we can find the Blanding's turtle and then we can scan to see if there's a pit tag in there. And what that can tell us is, has this animal been captured before? When was this one of the ones that was hatched under our care? Have we done blood work on it? What kind of weights have it? We can get a lot of information from this pit tag. But the big one is we can identify who this is. Before we had the pit tag, this is how we did it. We had basically a picture book. We had, we would take pictures of their plastron, we'd put it in a book, and then when we found a turtle, we would flip the turtle over and we would look and try and do comparatives. Very subjective, right? And not to mention that this pattern does change slightly. I have an activity that I love to do with the high school kids where we have it where it's kind of like old school where we have a bunch of plastron photos and we have some that are unidentified and then we have some that are identified and we're like match these up together and see what happens. And there's one little trick that we put in there is there's a new turtle that we found. But you don't know that it's a new turtle right away because you got to go through the whole picture book to figure that out sometimes. But with the pit tag, it becomes more objective and you're able to figure out who it is much quicker. So then we have to rely on our folks in the field to get this type of information. And this is Dan Thompson. He is our Blanding's turtle ecologist or herp ecologist, herpetile ecologist. And so he is out there in his waders throughout the years collecting information about these turtles and helping propagate them to increase their population. And this is how he has to do it. Let's see if I can get this to play right away. So that making that sound. Now he's done this probably a mile or so away. I'm honing in on it. So it would be louder the closer we get the more you focus to it. Gets close enough to it. He's got to put his hand in there and hope there's no snap the turtle next to him.
Oh,
he found
there he is.
Yay! So now he finds her. He'll check to see if she's gravid, meaning is she holding eggs? If she is, then he'll bring her back over to traditionally Willowbrook Wildlife Center. Right now we're under construction, so it's a little bit different. But bring it over to Willowbrook, and then that's when we kind of start our role with the propagation with these turtles. And we'll go into that a little bit more. But I just want to give you an idea. I like to talk to a lot of the students about this, about what it is like to do field work. Because this is a beautiful day, right? You can see the sun is shining, right? He's in some mucky waters. It's probably not super crazy out there, but even if it was 90 degrees out, he still have to be in those waders. Even if there's mosquitoes and flies and that kind of stuff, he's still out there collecting this information for the greater cause of trying to figure out what's going on with the blanding turtle, and in a lot of cases helping these animals to be able to survive. He's kind of like a great blue heron, in my opinion. He's a tall, thin fella with these long strides, and I've gone on some of the field work with him, and it takes some work to try and keep up with him. And he's a little older than I am, and I'm just like, man, he just walks right on through this. He's a wading bird. So he does what we call the Head Start program, and so the name literally comes because we want to give these turtles a head start. So we check to make sure they're gravid, and then when they are brought over to Willowbrook, we do an X-ray and figure out how many eggs are in there. We want to know exactly how many eggs are in there, because once they start laying the eggs, we want to make sure that there aren't any eggs that are stuck or any eggs that haven't been laid. They generally, if the turtle's healthy enough, can be reabsorbed, but it's not always the case. So we want to try and get every single egg out, because the reality is every single Blandings turtle does matter, and especially when they're endangered and their population is this low. So can anyone count how many eggs there are? A little less, 13. So we got 13 of them in there. Just to give you a little bit of orientation, this is the head tucked in. This is the little tail. See the little vertebrae right there? And then these are all of the eggs. They look kind of cool when they're in that extra. I think I counted that right, 13 back. Is there 15? Oh, there is 15. My apologies. I missed one. 2. Well, we want to know how many. So luckily that gets printed and you can continue to count it. So then after that, they're put into one of the pens. It's usually a sand pen. It's a protected pen, and then they're able to kind of walk around, and whenever they're ready, she can go ahead and lay her eggs. Now, eventually, if she's taking too long, we will induce if we need to. It's the same medicines that is used on humans, just to kind of get those eggs out. And usually it can go anywhere between 30 seconds to 2 minutes between eggs that are dropping. So it can take a little bit of time every once in a while. And then once she lays them, then she'll bury them, and then we mark where they're at, and then we'll come back and we'll dig them up, and then we'll bring them into this thing called a hobovator, which is basically an incubator for reptiles. And we have temperatures on there. Temperatures are important with reptiles because it can determine the sex of that reptile. And so generally speaking, we try to do a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 females to 1 male, because a single male can breed with multiple females, but a single female can only lay, let's say 15 eggs one time that year. And so we have females are going to be at a higher temperature, and males are going to be at a lower temperature. So females are 30.5 degrees Celsius, and males are at 26.5 degrees Celsius. So just a little bit. And so this is how it kind of gets determined out in the field. Out in the wild is when these eggs are laid, it could have to do with the moisture of the soil, the depth of the hole that was dug, the exposure to the sun. And so all of these factors kind of contribute, and it balances out a little bit more in the natural world because there's so many different factors that can determine the egg's temperature itself. But in our case, we can try and get more females out there to try and boost that number up. And then as they are growing and developing, we do what's called candle lighting, which is literally we put a light behind the egg and we look at the embryo, and we can see if there's movement or see if there's sometimes even a heartbeat. And so that's kind of why we look at just to make sure that the egg hasn't, the embryo inside the egg hasn't already deceased. So we just want to make sure that it's developing properly. And then when things go the way they're supposed to go.
So this is a little bit louder, but this is a little bit of a process. Generally, this is going to happen under the ground. So this turtle being able to see daylight, having probably tricky to get the video footage of it. A number of years ago. Actually, you're in things out. They grow and they develop. We use up all of that space. Right. Small and big as So us humans are probably really tempted to try to help peel that egg off, right? We want to be that piece that helps. But mama turtle is not around. I heard you're supposed to good. What am I got? There we go. So I waited because I wanted to show you this. This is their yolk sac. That's what they survive on.
Dan, are you gonna be able to put those incubator units up?
So they absorb that yolk sac, and that's what they're able to do. And then after a couple of days, then they can start to find aquatic invertebrates and aquatic vegetation for them to go ahead and feed on. While they're growing in our care, we want to measure. We want to see how the growing is going. We don't want them to grow too quickly. We definitely don't want them to grow too slowly. So we measure them, we weigh them, we determine, okay, how they're doing. They get a little bit bigger. They sit inside of basically like a little jewelry or tackle box, and they absorb their yolk sacs. And then we start to mark them so that we can know who they are as individuals, determine whether they're male or female, depending on which hobovator they had come out of. And then as they grow, we know that we're still focusing on that one. So we treat them as single individual animals. They are single sentient beings. And then we have them in another a little bit bigger with their numbers on them. And you know it is not for turtle racing. This is strictly for science and research. But we do give them little turtle pellets in there. And the reason we do this is because we want to make sure that at this stage in their life, they are getting the appropriate nutrients they need so that they have the best chance of survival. We don't want them to compete yet. Once they come into these tubs, this is where we start to want them to exhibit more natural behaviors. We want them to learn how to bask. We want them to swim more. We want them to find cover and shelter. And we want them to compete with each other a little bit for food. We still want to make sure that they get plenty of food, and we're still going to monitor their weights and their sizes to make sure that nobody's a runt and nobody's overtaking the entire clutch or the entire tub. But we definitely want them to learn how to compete when they have an opportunity to do so. And then in the fall, if they are of the right age, we can release them into the wetlands. And they just go and swim on off. Now, if they are female, we will put a transmitter on them. And if they are male, we will not put the transmitter on there. Even at that young of an age, we can still get a transmitter out. So you can see even though they haven't been in this environment, they were raised in for a short period of time, for summer in captivity, they still know exactly what they need to do. And so here's what happens. Here's the growth stages of a Blanding's turtle. The ones that you saw in there, those were hatchlings. Those are ones that were released, like I said, in the fall. And so this is a hatchling. The one next to it is about a year-old turtle. A 1-year-old turtle, sometimes what we'll do is we'll wait a whole other year, and then we'll release them the next year. And in some cases, we can even wait 2 years before we release them out into the wild. And what that does is it prevents them from going into brumation or hibernation, and it allows them to continuously grow. And that's kind of where the Head Start program gets its name as well, is now it has a little bit of a head start, right? So it could be a 2-year-old turtle, but it has a longer growing season than a wild-born Blanding's turtle. And here's an example of it. So this turtle is about probably, I believe, 2 years of age, but it is the size of a 4 to 6-year-old wild turtle. And if you remember that graph at 5 years old, that's when it starts to slow down on the predation and the deaths or the mortality rates of them. And so we try to get, if we can get them closer to that size when we release them into the wild, then they have a better chance of survival. And then this is a full-grown mature adult. And so they're about this big, just so you kind of get an idea. They can get around that size. There are some concerns though when we are doing this. We want to make sure, like I'd mentioned before, we don't have them grow too quickly. If they grow too quickly, they can get some shell deformities. We don't want shell deformities. Not necessarily that the shell isn't strong enough. It could be the case, but that dome shape is important because the predators struggle to get a good grip on that. If we give them a little bit of bumps and things to grab onto, it could increase potential predation. We also want to get them outside as fast as possible because you can see that their exposure to UV and sunlight can impact their coloration. A wild one over here, more pigmentation. A captive one over here, more pale in color. So you can kind of see that difference as well. We also want to monitor for genetic mutations. What we have is xanthic turtles. We don't want to have xanthic turtles. The xanthic is this white one. This is basically a bullseye for any predator that's out in the water. You can see that white turtle swimming away. Someone can grab it really quickly. That's why they wouldn't really do well to survive. So these are the ones that generally will turn, if they're able to survive, they may become ambassador animals as one of the options so that people can learn more about Blanding's turtles. Or they'll be at like places like Peggy Notabart Nature Museum in Chicago, that type of stuff, to kind of give them a little bit of an opportunity to still hang out with their other Blanding's turtles. But we do want to monitor genetic mutations. We kind of learned about how prone they are to white coloration in the past. The epoxy that was used to put the transmitter on the turtles had a white color to it. We were finding that this was becoming problematic because it was way too visual when they were swimming away. So we started to turn it into a darker color so they could blend in better. A learning process. This one. All right, he said to change this to, I don't know. So these are a little bit of older turtles. They are probably, these are ones that have at least been 1 year. This looks more like one that's probably overwintered for 2 years. Just a bigger, better chance for survival. Same instinctual behavior, taking cover right away. You can see the spots are more developed on them, so a little bit better. Breaks up the shape of them, gives them a little bit of a better chance for survival. When we're not tracking them, we're trapping them first. So we trap them just to make sure that we trap in a specific area. So we want to find out who's living in this spot. We know Blanding's turtles have been here in the past. Are there other turtles that they're living with? So this is when we find snapping turtles, painted turtles, other species of turtles as well, and Blanding's turtles. And then sometimes this is also where we can find a female that was born in the wild, or possibly a male that was born in the wild that we don't have any record of. And so this is one of the other opportunities, is we can get the ones that are wild ones, and then we can help them to make sure that they can reproduce more safely. And the benefits of this are right here. This is a cute little family. We have grandma and mama and the baby. And so this was one of our first 3 generations of Blanding's turtles that we were able to have. So this was a head start. And when this one was sexually mature, laid this egg. And when this little one was sexually matured, laid this little egg. And so it's really cool to be able to see 3 generations of that, of the turtles. It shows you that there is some progress with the program. But we do want to ask ourselves, are we successful? And so what we use is Miller's criteria for success of translocated populations. Wow, that's a fun title to say. But what we're looking for is recapture of released individuals, reproduction, population growth, and a viable population. And so we ask ourselves these questions when we're taking care of these turtles to determine whether or not this is really working. And so then it comes down to the science, the research, and the statistics, the fun nitty-gritty stuff of it. So on those rainy days or the winter days, this is when a lot of the information is assessed and determined. And this is just, some of the data is a little bit older, but it can still show you the trend. But the number that we're looking at over here is the one that we want to focus on, catch per trap per day, because this is more of a percentage. And what we're seeing from 2012 just to 2016, you can see that it went from 0.012 to 0.079. And so that's an increase. Yes, these numbers are different because that might have to do with how many traps we can send out, how many staff and volunteers we can get to help us find these turtles, and to count the traps that are, the animals that are in the traps. But what was important is the average, the catch per trap per day. That's what we're trying to figure out. We want to be able to catch more per day. Another statistic that we looked at is the number of individuals captured in the field. And so again, this main thing here is we just want to note that there's an increase. That's what's important to us for the most part. The nuances of it we can dive into, but we don't have time, unfortunately. This is a graph of the wild ones compared to the Head Start ones. And so what you're seeing here is if you look at the wild ones, the green ones, those numbers don't look like they're really going up. In fact, it kind of looks like there's a little bit of a lull in some of these years. But our Head Start efforts are what are allowing these populations to continue to grow, which is what allows us to keep going up like this. So if we stop the Head Start program, the question remains, could this Blanding's turtle be able to be a viable population on its own with its current conditions? Or would we have to change our current conditions to get that more viable? We can ensure that the population is growing if we are able to help out. And this is hatchlings from the wild versus captive reared turtles. And so it's overall, I mean, you can see there is a little bit of an increase, but again, we've had to have a little bit more of a heavy hand in certain years. Again, that could also have to do with the data collection that's going on, but captive turtles compared to the wild turtles. All right, this is going to be a little bit of a wordy slide because these are from the highlights from 2022. And I just wanted to make sure that I went over these quickly, but we had 167 Blanding's turtle hatchlings. All right, and the reason it's wordy is because there's like little caveats as to why this might be the case. And so in this kind of situation, we had drought conditions that impacted part of it. 6 known female turtles were not located this year. They could have provided another 80 eggs. The discovery of the shell rot fungus. How many of you have heard of shell rot fungus? That's its own issue that's going on right now. That's going to impact where we can do the propagation, where we can release the turtles. And so that's going to also have a big factor. And don't exactly have numbers and statistics on it just yet because it's just kind of still happening. We go from one disease to the next, right? We have COVID, we have avian influenza, now we have shell rot disease. So pick your poison. So we did not bring gravid females to Willowbrook this year because of the shell rot potential, but also because of our construction that's going to be going on. So that does have a little bit of impact as well. They were released, the Head Start turtles were released back into the wild as hatchlings instead of the next year due to the shell rot, like I was mentioning. So we didn't give them that bigger size, that better potential for them to be able to survive because we had to get them out there because we didn't want them to have that and get that communal disease, and definitely don't want that to be spread in our local waters. Don't know of any in our local waters as of yet. So then we have our overall statistics, 274 eggs, captured 71 through trapping. And then this is a fun one. First time in 27 years, we captured a wild male that had never been trapped or recovered before. And that's what we're looking for. We want to find the ones we haven't found before because that means they're breeding on their own and they're succeeding on their own. And if they're making it to sexual maturity on their own. But we can't do it all on our own. We do rely on Brookfield Zoo and other organizations like the Shed Aquarium, Cosley Zoo. And Brookfield Zoo in particular is pretty cool because they have a soft release pen and an assurance colony, which is basically what that means is the soft release pen is they have protections, but they are they're mostly wild. They can still get all the natural introductions that they need with not having to worry so much about raccoons and mink and great blue herons and those. This is kind of one of their pens. You can kind of see the Blanding's turtles all over the place. This is not what it looks like in the wild when you go into their habitat. You saw what Dan was doing. He was like, where is this turtle? We work with the University of Illinois to do some blood work to check for diseases and others as well. We've also worked with Wheaton College. They've done some paternity tests to determine if inbreeding potential. Is it better to relocate certain species to help populations? That study isn't going on anymore, but we have worked with a number of different universities and colleges. I really like to show this photo because when this program first started, this is what we would catch in a year. This is what we caught in one day. And I believe it was 2018 when this photo was taken. So you can see the increase is happening. It is happening. But we do have some ongoing goals. We want to restore and create wetlands and nesting areas, coordinate in-depth studies with universities. We're still working on that. Improve corridors for movement. I'm a big fan of corridors. Those are wildlife corridors. Basically, that's safe passage. It allows for them to get past those roads a lot safer, get past those neighborhoods a lot safer. A little bit of upfront cost, but it definitely has its benefits. We want to reduce predation impacts, maximize egg collection numbers, and improve our husbandry techniques, because if they're in our care, we want to make sure that they are the best planting turtles that we can help grow, propagate. And then these are all the organizations that we've worked with in the past. So we've got quite a few. I could talk for a lot longer about planting turtles, or pretty much any wildlife around here. But we are running out of time, so I just wanted to kind of open this up to the questions. So how did you want to do this? Do you want to do online or audience?
Well, I'll just first start with a reminder that if you are in our virtual audience, go ahead and open up your Q&A. Again, that's one of those icons along the bottom edge of your Zoom window. Open that up and enter any questions that you have there. Also, if you are watching alongside someone, if you could just let us know that there's more than one person watching the screen, if you would just put that in the chat for us. But while we're still thinking about those questions, I'll open it up to anyone here in our in-person audience. Does anyone have any questions? Just raise your hand and I'll come over with the microphone.
How long are the eggs inside the mother turtle?
How long are they developing inside of the turtle? Let me think about generally they're laid. We generally will grab them around June. They're laid end of July, early August. So yes, yep. Oh no, that's not accurate. You want to know inside of them. I'm talking about when they're starting to hatch. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I gotta look at the specifics. Usually, I want to say it's between 30 and 40 days inside the mother. Yeah, and then another 30 days when they're actually starting to develop, or before they hatch. But I got to double check on that with Dan as far as the specific timeline.
Okay, and then maybe a follow-up question from that. I'm just thinking about the eggs that are hatching out in the wild. How long between the time when they're hatched and I'm sorry, when the eggs are laid and then when they hatch? So during that really vulnerable time.
So, when they are developing within the embryos, like when their embryos are developing inside of the eggs after they've been laid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. A lot of parts with reptiles, they don't make it easy for us, right? It's not 9 months. So from what I remember, I believe it was between 3 to 4 weeks.
Wow. Okay, so they're vulnerable for that long out there.
Oh yeah.
All right. Just looking and seeing if we have any questions from our virtual audience here. All right. Anybody else in our in-person audience with a question? Just raise your hand. Or anything else about the great work that Willowbrook does?
I was interested in the question, I'm sorry, about the photo that you had with the x-ray and you found the hook. Is every turtle that's brought in x-rayed, or was there a reason that photo was taken?
So that photo was taken because it was ingested. And so we didn't have the visual. We knew something was in there. So there could have been a fishing line that was sticking out, but we didn't know where it was. So that x-ray was more to locate what the foreign object was. Other animals that will come in, a lot of times it'll get caught on their face, their mouth, and we won't need to do x-rays on that. So we'll only do the x-rays if we absolutely have to, if it's going to benefit the medical care of the animal.
Okay, thank you. Someone at home is asking, what can the general public do to help the turtles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a number of things. The Blandings Turtle Project does receive donations. You can check out our website, DuPageForest.org.
So what do they eat and what is their environmental impact? Oh, like how is the That's a tough question. So what they eat is they actually are omnivorous. So they're going to eat aquatic invertebrates. They might even eat small fish. They'll eat aquatic vegetation as well. As far as quality of water, and the environmental impact on them. They're pretty hardy as far as the quality of water is concerned. So it's not significant, but there is a tipping point, just like with any other animal. If it gets too intense, it's going to impact their food supply. It's going to impact the vegetation that's growing around them. One of the biggest battles that we have right now is making sure that they have the appropriate water levels and vegetation within their habitat. Because if you're familiar with like canary reedgrass and phragmites and those types of non-native vegetation, that stuff is just taking over in a lot of places. And so that is starting to impact just the other flora within that region, which eventually will start to trickle down and affect the turtles as well.
Yes, I'm involved with the Friends of the Forest Preserve District and the Sierra Club, and there's a joint program between those two organizations. Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. It's about Willowbrook and about the changing mission, how things are changing there, and a lot of construction in the next 2 years. It'll be a whole new hospital, whole new visitor center to handle the huge volume of animals coming in. And that'll be at the Glen Ellen History Center tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. So at 800 North Main Street in Glen Ellen, just south of Geneva Road, if you're familiar with that. So there'll be a lot about the mission and a lot about the nature of the new hospital. So it'll be very enlightening. So thank you.
No problem. The aerial photos from 1954 to 2003. Yeah. So the nests that we're tracking aren't wild nests. The turtles that we're using, we did do that this year. We did have to do some nest tracking this year to make sure that they're hatching and everything's going okay for them, because we weren't able to let them propagate within Willowbrook Wildlife Center, unfortunately. But generally speaking, they can move within a couple miles radius of where they're at. Will they return to the same spot? Generally speaking, in this area, they're going to return to a close area, but that's more of a result of what's available for them, the resources that are available. It's not like salmon specifically, where they're going right back to their exact breeding grounds. That's not crucial. But I will say this, with Willowbrook, what we do when we find in particular herpetiles, so reptiles and amphibians, if there's one that's sick and injured, it is pretty important, and we try our darndest to get that animal back to where it was last found. And the biggest reason for that is to prevent any spread of bacteria and viruses, because they're more susceptible because they're aquatic species, and more prone to impacts of toxins and pollutions as well. So we want to get them back to as close to where they came from when there are patients. But as far as being out in the wild, again, if they can find their food, water, shelter, and their breeding grounds, a nice nesting habitat, then they'll go wherever they can.
Okay, someone in our at-home audience is asking, you work with Brookfield Zoo. Do you know if someone can see the blanding turtles at Brookfield?
I don't believe that's accessible to the public, but they have in the past had at least one representative of the species that was in, I think it was the Hamill Family Play Zoo area. And as far as I'm aware, I haven't been in there for a while, but the longevity of the turtle would say that it should still be there, hopefully.
Great, thank you. And someone else is asking, where do they hibernate?
So what they'll do is they, with the turtles, they'll dig below the frost line, and they'll go up into the mud, basically, that's close by where the wetlands might be. So it could get flooded, it could get underwater, but they don't really require as much oxygen to breathe when they are in that brumation or hibernation mode. So pretty much the short answer is they bury themselves nice and deep so that they don't get frozen.
Okay, thank you. And another question from our virtual audience. How can you tell a turtle is gravid when they are out in the field?
So what you do is you lift the turtle up and you palpate. There is access between the carapace and the plastron, kind of like right around here. And you literally can feel eggs inside of the females. We have a little activity sometimes when we do STEM outreach programs where we have a stuffed turtle and we stuff little eggs inside, like Easter egg looking stuff, and we have the kids go and kind of feel the turtle to determine whether or not that turtle has eggs or not.
Okay, any other questions from our in-person audience? Maybe one more? Here, I can bring you this mic.
I think I said the Willowbrook event is tomorrow night, but I meant Thursday, April 6th. I just forget what day of the week it is sometimes.
Okay, thank you. So that,
That sounds like a nice problem to have sometimes.
okay, I'm just looking around at any other questions. All right. Well, thank you so much, Nate. We really appreciate your time and all this excellent information.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Just a note, I will be sending out a number of links to resources in an email following tonight's presentation. And we also will be putting the recording up on the library's YouTube page. If you would like any of those links and you are watching this recording, you can just email me at ce@wheatonlibrary.org. That's CE for community engagement at wheatonlibrary.org. And I'd be happy to send those resources out to you. But with that, we'll say good night. Everyone stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.